was a typical summer evening in Florida, and my best friend and I, both around 7 or 8 years old, were having one of our countless sleepovers. We'd been inseparable since kindergarten, playing with Barbies, watching movies, and laughing until we couldn't catch our breath. But that night, something was different. It was around 9 or 10 p.m. when I climbed into my top bunk, flipping the fan on and asking my mom to turn down the AC. The house was old, the kind where everything creaks and groans, and the landlord never bothered to fix anything. As soon as I laid down, something felt off, but I brushed it aside. The fan suddenly clicked off, and so did the AC. I assumed the power had gone out and thought nothing more of it. About 20 minutes later, my body was drenched in sweat. The heat was unbearable, the air thick and stifling. I whispered my friend's name, unsure if she was still awake. "I can't sleep, but it's not because of the heat," she replied softly. Confused, I asked, "What is it then?" She hesitated for a moment before saying, "It's the man in the corner." A cold wave of terror washed over me. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. Slowly, I turned my head to look at her, then cautiously turned to the corner of the room. At first, I saw nothing. The darkness in the corner seemed thick, almost alive, but there was no sign of a person. I exhaled with relief, telling myself my friend was just scared. That's when I saw him. A tall, dark figure stood in the corner, staring at us, unmoving. My breath caught in my throat, and I grabbed my friend's hand, squeezing it so hard I thought it might break. The man had no features, just a black silhouette, as if he was made of shadows. The air around us grew colder, suffocating. I whispered urgently, "We have to get my mom," but we didn't move. We were paralyzed, staring at this figure that seemed to grow larger by the second. Then I felt it, the unmistakable sound of someone climbing up the ladder, slow and deliberate. My blankets shifted as if someone were crawling toward us. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me like a physical presence. My friend's eyes were wide with fear, and I knew she could see it too. I whispered frantically, "Scream when I tap your finger." With shaking hands, I reached out, gently tapping her finger. And then, in a split second, we screamed, loud, desperate screams that filled the room. My mom rushed in, her face pale with fear, turning on the light as we cried, clutching each other. The man was gone, as if he had never been there. My mom checked the doors and windows. Everything was locked, untouched. We didn't sleep that night. We stayed on the couch, watching Barbie movies, our bodies still shaking from what we had seen. I don't know what it was, who it was, but I'll never forget the feeling, the icy chill of death itself hovering just inches from my face. I was around 4 or 5 years old when it happened, and Jessica was my world. She was my small Jack Russell, white with brown spots, and she never left my side. We went everywhere together, from the garden to the park, my little shadow always there. I grew up, and the memory of Jessica remained with me, but time passed. A few years ago, during a holiday visit with my grandparents, I started reminiscing about my old dog. We were in the kitchen, my grandmother preparing dinner, when I mentioned how much I missed Jessica. She stopped what she was doing, her hands trembling slightly, her face suddenly pale. "Who is that?" she asked, confused. Taken aback, I explained, "She was my dog when I was little, white with brown spots. We did everything together." My grandmother's eyes widened with disbelief. "How do you know that name?" Confused, I asked her to explain. She paused for a long moment before speaking. "You never had a dog named Jessica." Her voice was tight, disbelieving. "But I did, when I was your age. I had a Jack Russell, white with brown spots. I used to take her on walks in the garden." I was stunned, unable to comprehend what she was saying. How could I know about a dog that was hers, not mine? It felt like someone had pulled the ground out from under me. I never spoke of Jessica again after that day, but the eerie feeling never left. How could I remember something that wasn't even part of my life? Just a few days ago when I had an experience that has haunted me ever since. I was dog-sitting for my boyfriend in a semi-remote area near the highway, surrounded by both well-maintained homes and abandoned ones. The kind of neighborhood that seems safe but you never quite feel at ease. Hennessy, my boyfriend's massive 115-pound American Bulldog mix, was protective of me, always. Lottie, my 57-pound Poodle mix, was sweet but much less imposing. I would walk Lottie first, then take Hennessy out later. That night, I decided to take Hennessy out after Lottie, feeling safer with him as the night grew darker. I was walking Lottie when I felt it, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I turned to look, and about 30 feet behind me, there was a tall man standing next to a dilapidated house. He wore a hoodie, which struck me as odd considering it was well over 80 degrees, even with the setting sun. I tried to ignore it, but as I continued walking, I noticed he was keeping pace with me. Every time I turned a corner, he did too. He was always there, always at that same distance. As I reached the highway, I crossed the street, hoping the car speeding past would help put distance between us. But no, the man kept following. Now, his footsteps were unmistakable, loud on the gravel, echoing in the quiet evening. I hurried home, Lottie barking nervously. Once inside, I locked the door, my heart racing. But that wasn't the end. Moments later, I heard someone trying to open the door. The dog started barking furiously. I asked, "Who's there?" through the thin door, but I already knew. I heard his voice, low and chilling. "I love your dog. Can I meet her?" The way he said it made my blood run cold. It was rehearsed, like he had said it 100 times before. He tried the handle again, pressing against the door as if trying to break in. I grabbed Hennessy's collar, keeping him close. My heart pounded as I heard the man again. "I love your dog, can I meet her?" At that moment, Hennessy snarled, teeth bared, and I knew I had to act fast. With a surge of adrenaline, I opened the door just wide enough to let Hennessy out. The man didn't know what hit him. Hennessy lunged forward, knocking him back, and the man cursed as he stumbled, then turned and fled into the night. I slammed the door shut, shaking, and called the police. They didn't do much, just took my statement, but I was grateful for Hennessy. He had protected us when I couldn't. I made sure to buy him the biggest bone I could find the next day, thankful beyond words. Every year, my best friend and I head out for our annual camping trip. It's a tradition that's been going on since we were 13. We've never had anything truly strange happen. Just the usual mix of campfire stories, beer, and good times. That is, until last year in the Blue Ridge Mountains. It was peak season, so space was tight. We arrived just as the sun started to dip behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the forest. We found a spot on the side of the mountain, one that was perfect except for one small problem. It was a wind tunnel, the kind of wind that rattles your tent, howls through the trees, and makes you wonder if the mountain itself is trying to tell you something. Morning came and we headed into town, grabbed some beers and just goofed off, not giving much thought to the wind or the eerie quiet that clung to the mountains. When we returned later in the day, the light was fading and we needed to find a new spot. We managed to get to a more remote area of the woods just in time. The sun had barely dipped below the horizon as we set up our tents and started another fire. By 1 a.m., we were well into our second round of beers when it happened. A flashlight flickered in the distance. At first, we didn't think much of it. After all, we were deep in the mountains and it could be a park ranger or another camper. But then the light started moving toward us, cutting through the darkness like a predator stalking its prey. There was something off about it. No one comes that deep into the woods at this hour unless they have a reason to. It's an unwritten rule, a strange understanding among campers that you don't just walk up on someone at night unless it's an emergency. When the light got closer, we saw him. A man, probably in his early 50s, wearing a worn shirt and basketball shorts, with a flashlight that seemed to bounce unnaturally in his hand. Behind him, a woman who couldn't have been more than 40, her eyes darting away from us the moment they made contact. It was obvious she didn't want to be there, like she was caught in something she couldn't escape. The man didn't acknowledge the time. He didn't acknowledge the fact that it was past midnight, and his presence was utterly bizarre. Instead, he launched into an idle, rambling conversation about nothing. He asked about our lantern, what model we had, what brand, and then proceeded to tell us out of nowhere that he used to be in law enforcement. It was so out of context, so completely unrelated to what was happening, that I couldn't tell if he was just trying to sound authoritative or if it was a feeble attempt to gain our trust. But then something happened that sent a chill straight down my spine. He turned his flashlight onto our tents, scanning them as if he were a hawk spotting prey. "Oh, that's where you guys are sleeping, huh? Cool setup," he said. The words were too casual, too detached, and his eyes, they weren't focused on us. They were focused on everything else. The ground around us, the backpacks, the equipment, anything that might tell him how many of us there were or what we had. It felt like he was sizing us up, assessing the situation, looking for something. For what? I couldn't tell. His flashlight danced over the area, methodically, like a predator eyeing its next meal. It wasn't the casual glance of someone trying to be friendly, it was the gaze of someone who was measuring us, who was waiting for something. A moment, a weakness. It was as if he were planning to come back once we were asleep, to take whatever he wanted, whatever he thought we had. And then, without another word, he turned and walked back into the woods. The light flickered for a moment before it disappeared into the darkness, leaving us in an unsettling silence. My friend and I didn't even need to speak. I could see the fear in his eyes, the same dread that I was feeling. Without a word, we packed up our things as quickly as we could, our hands shaking with the adrenaline of whatever the hell just happened. We didn't look back. We didn't stop until we were back at the car, miles away from that spot, breathing heavily and trying to shake the feeling that we had narrowly escaped something we couldn't even comprehend. That night, in the Blue Ridge Mountains, something sinister had been waiting for us. I don't know what that man's intentions were, but I know one thing for sure. He was sizing us up, and if we had stayed, we would have been vulnerable. It's not just the encounter that haunts me, it's the feeling that he knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't lost. He wasn't a wanderer. He had a plan, and for some reason we were part of it. If you've ever had a moment where you felt like someone was sizing you up, really sizing you up, you'll know exactly what I mean. It's the kind of thing that leaves a mark that lingers long after the night ends. If you want to hear more chilling stories from the wild, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. You never know what's lurking out there in the darkness.